students. We are meeting after a long time. We begin with Story of Anna. The original name of Story of Anna was The Dream of Anna, written by an American author, CHOPIN. She is famous for her feminist writings. It's a terribly beautiful story. Now let me talk about the terribly beautiful. That's an oxymoron. Terribly, we connect it with something negative, and beautiful, we connect it with something positive. When we connect two words like this, a negative word and a positive word together to describe something, we call the figure of speech oxymoron. Note down that word oxymoron. There is an oxymoron in this sentence that you have to pick it later as we oxymoron. Now let's go to the story. There is an oxymoron in this lesson and you should pick it up. I'll say when and the Story of Anna by CHOPIN. It's interesting if we walk along in the story. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard, she is the protagonist. Underline Mrs. Mallard and write there protagonist. Was afflicted with a heart trouble. That's an important point. She is afflicted with the heart trouble. Her heart trouble is the key point of this story. Great care was taken to break to her as gently as possible the news of her husband's death. So, something terrible has happened. Her husband has died. And why should the news be broken as gently as possible? Please take up a notebook by your side and write the question. Why should the news be broken as gently as possible? The news should be broken gently as possible because she is having heart trouble. So if we say something very fast or suddenly, it may affect her heart and she may die. So it's said very softly to her. It was her sister Josephine who told her in broken sentences, in a roundabout way, veiled hints that revealed in half concealing her husband's friend Richards was there too. So both of them are standing together and explaining to her what has happened to her husband. It was he who had been in the newspaper office when intelligence of the railroad disaster was received, with Brentley Mallard's name leading the list of the killed. So now you see all the four characters in the story is being presented by now. Mrs. Mallard, Sister Josephine, friend Richards, and Mr. Mallard, that is Brentley Mallard. He had only taken the time to assure himself of its truth by a second telegram and had hastened to forestall any less careful, less tender friend in bearing the sad message. He didn't want somebody else to come suddenly and tell Mrs. Mallard that her husband is dead and then create any trouble there or something bad happening to Mrs. Mallard. Now here you take down the next question. How was the news of death confirmed? First, the newspaper office got the list of killed persons. Mr. Brentley Mallard's name was there, and second, he assured it by a second telegram. Both the points must be written, please. Now here is another thing that we can make out from these two paragraphs. There the word railroad accident and telegram indicates that the setting is in the 18th century and the second part of 18th century or the early 19th century. So the tragic news is revealed to the wife and she did not listen to that the way usually that happens in the drama. Tang, and the the receiver is frozen. It was not like that. See how it is done. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. That paralyzed inability means frozen, suddenly shocked. See, what is the reaction? Please take down the question. What was her reaction on hearing the news? Answer to it. She wept at once, with sudden wild abandonment in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, that is after crying out, she went away to her room alone. She would have no one follow her. She did not want anybody to follow her. She wanted to sit alone. She wanted to sit by herself for some time. Now the next two paragraphs, very important. There stood facing the open window. The open window, underline it. The significance of the open window is it's opening to a new space, new life. It's symbolic of she is open to new ideas. A comfortable, roomy armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by a physical exhaustion and haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. It's by a physical exhaustion that haunted her body and seemed to reach into her soul. So she was very tired, she was sad, she was sitting on the chair, but she was in front of an open window. She could see in the open square before her house the tops of trees that were all aqua with the new spring life. Underline new spring life. Usually the season that is connected with death is winter. Here it is spring, new life. The delicious breath of the rain. Imagery, visual imagery is used. New spring of life, the delicious breath of the rain. It is the olfactory imagery, smell, delicious breath of the rain was in the air. In the street below, a peddler was crying his wares. Auditory imagery, you can hear the peddler crying out. The notes of a distant song, again auditory imagery, which someone was singing reached her faintly. And countless sparrows were twittering in the eaves. So everything positive, beautiful is reaching her ears. There were patches of blue sky. Underline blue sky. Blue sky symbolifies life, positive feeling. Showing here and there through the clouds. Clouds stand for gloominess that had met and piled one above the other in west facing her window. She sat with her head thrown back upon the cushion of the chair, quite motionless, without any thought, except when a sob came up into her throat and shook her, as a child who has cried herself to sleep continues to sob in its dreams. Now see here, the woman, Mrs. Mallard, is compared to a child. She was young, with a fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. Mrs. Mallard is a young lady. Here is the line which shows that she is a young lady. She is beautiful and all, with a fair, calm face. She is beautiful, she is young. So that means there is quite a long life ahead of her. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of those patches of blue sky. See, she is looking towards a positive effect. Not to the clouds, her gaze is on the blue sky. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. She was blank, she was just sitting like that. Now comes the important thing. There was something coming to her and she was waiting for it fearfully. She's scared, but she knows something, some thought is coming to her. What was it? She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive to name. She couldn't identify it, but she felt it creeping out of the sky, reaching toward her through the sounds, the scent. Now her bosom rose and fell tumultuously. She was beginning to recognize this thing that was approaching to possess her, and she was striving to beat it back with her will, as powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. She was trying to fight back. She wanted to put it away, but it was coming to her. When she abandoned herself, she stopped fighting back. She thought, whatever is coming, let it come to her. A little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. She said it over and over under her breath. Free, free, free. The vacant stare. Vacant stare, why? She couldn't understand what is happening. And the look of terror, she was scared, that had followed it went from her eyes. Now that scare went off. They stayed keen and bright. See the difference in the eyes? The look of terror went away. Now the eyes are keen and bright. Her pulses beat fast, and the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy. She did not stop to ask, or she did not bother that it was a monstrous joy. Does something strike to you?
Yes.
Monstrous joy that held her. Yes. Note it down. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. Let it go. She just dismissed it. And see the next sentence. She knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, that is, of her husband. She says that she is free, but then she says she knew that she would weep again when she saw the kind, tender hands folded in death, the face that had never looked save with love upon her, fixed and grey and dead. Now, I want you all to take down few questions that I missed till here. You have to write the question. Next question, please. Explain the imagery and its implication in the fourth and fifth paragraph. And the next question, what do you know about the protagonist? The description of the protagonist is given here. She was young with a fair, calm face, all those things. Whatever you came to know about the protagonist and what you are going to know later, that also should be written. Now, the next question, pick out the oxymoron. Now, the last question, do you feel Mrs. Mallard's character to be strange? Explain. And the next question, what is Mrs. Mallard looking forward to? That's what we are going to see now, what she is going to look forward to. But she saw beyond that bitter moment a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. That is point number one. She is looking forward to the number of years that she is going to live. That is belonging only to her absolutely, her own life. And she opened and spread her arms out to welcome them. Welcome the beautiful years she was going to live alone. Second point, there will be no one to live for her during those coming years. She doesn't have to wake up for somebody else. She can sleep as long as she likes. She doesn't have to cook for somebody else. She doesn't have to look for the wishes of somebody else. She would live for herself. There would be no powerful will bending hers. That is, during that century, you must remember, children, during that end of 18th and early 19th century, during those times, women, the only work of women was making babies, looking after them, looking after the husband, looking after the household affairs, just closed inside the houses. So maybe Mrs. Mallard was a person, a bit forward person, who wanted to have her own identity, who wanted to have her own life. But here you must note, Mrs. Mallard never says that she is having a cruel husband, because the word that says she saw the kind, tender hands. Second, she says the face always looked up to her with love, only love. But still, she was a person who wanted a free life. In that blind, persistence with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. That is, maybe she had to live according to the wishes of Mr. Mallard. A kind intention or a cruel intention. Maybe Mr. Mallard must have been very caring regarding Mrs. Mallard because she was a heart patient. Maybe that care was suffocating her. Maybe that concern was suffocating her. We don't know what it is. Made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. What was illumination? That she was going to have a free life of her own. And yet, she had loved him. Sometimes, not always, sometimes. Often, she had not. Often, she did not love him all the time. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery? Oh, there lies one point. Mrs. Mallard has never fallen in love, not even with the husband. Count for in the face of this possession of self-assertion, which is suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being. Free body and soul free. Physically also she was free and mentally free, she kept whispering. Josephine was kneeling before the closed door with her lips to the keyhole, imploring her admission. Louis, open the door, I beg, open the door. You will make yourself ill. What are you doing, Louis? For heaven's sake, open the door. Sister is worried. Maybe this Mrs. Mallard, in her grief, she may hang herself, do something drastic. She is scared. Mrs. Mallard replies, go away. I am not making myself ill. No. She was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. She was receiving all the happiness through that open window. The thought that she is going to be free. Her fancy was running riot along those days ahead of her. See what she was looking forward to? Spring days and summer days and all sorts of days that would be her own. She breathed a quick prayer that her life might be long. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. Yesterday she had prayed, oh God, when is this stupid life going to end? And today she wants her life to be ever after long. She arose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. Underline the like a goddess of victory. It's an allusion. In Greek mythology, Nike is the goddess of victory. So she was coming down like Nike, like goddess of victory. She clasped her sister's waist and together they descended the stairs. You can imagine both of them holding hands, descending like queen. Two queens, they were coming down. Richards stood waiting for them at the bottom. Here comes the climax. Someone was opening the front door. One second, let me keep the book straight. Someone was opening the front door with a latch key. It was Bentley Mallard who entered. A little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. There comes in the husband. Gone with the wind are the dreams that Mrs. Mallard saw. He had been far from the scene of accident and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry. Josephine saw Mr. Mallard and she opened her mouth and she didn't know what to do. What will happen? Now this is a sudden news that going to her. At Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife, Richard tried to shield Bentley Mallard from Mrs. Mallard. But Richards was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. That's the irony. according to Sister Josephine, friend Richards, Brently Mallett and the doctor, Mrs. Mallett died because of the joy of seeing her husband. Don't we know why she died? Yeah, that is the irony of the story. Okay, children, how was the story? Now there are a few more questions that you have to write. That's these points you write on your own. You can write any answers. What was Mr. Mallett an abusive husband? If you say yes, you have to justify it with quotes from the text. If you say no, you have to justify it from the quotes of the text. You can even write that question as, was Mrs. Mallett suffering from abusive marriage? Now what is the climax of the story? The entry of Mallett, and the story ends in irony. Now you ask yourself the question, was it joy that killed Mrs. Mallett? Mrs. Louis Mallett. Thank you.